And now, Chief Bertrand, we are ready to hear your opening statement. 5 minutes, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members, and fellow witnesses. My name is Robert Bertrand, National Chief of the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, or we call it CAP. I thank the committee members and staff for this invitation to share our constituents' concerns. Mr. Chair, we appreciate this invitation to appear. We also would like to thank Jamie Schmale for his recent work in Parliament and in this committee to ensure the urban Indigenous population is heard. Since 1971, CAP has been fighting tirelessly for the rights, interests, and needs of off-reserve, status, and non-status Indians, Métis, and Southern Inuit people. In 2016, the Cap Daniels Supreme Court decision unanimously ruled that non-status and Métis people are Indians under the Constitution. This decision means our people are without question an area of federal responsibility. In 2018, CAP signed a political accord with the Government of Canada to work towards including our people in federal policy. Sadly, there is a long way to go before our people have equitable treatment. CAP is also the national voice for our 10 provincial and territorial affiliates, or PTOs as we call them. They are advocates to provincial and territorial governments just as we are with the federal government. Our PTOs are service providers. They work in areas such as housing, education, employment, health, and language. But these services cannot meet demand because they are excluded from federal funding. Our communities have been historically known as the forgotten peoples. In the past, this referred to Indigenous peoples excluded from the Indian Act, treaties, and land claim agreements. Today, we add those excluded from the government's distinction-based approach to the list. Even under the COVID pandemic, federal policies continue to discriminate. In March, government announced a $305 million support package for Indigenous peoples dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. $290 million was designated for distinction-based organizations who are focused on Indigenous peoples living on reserve and in other specific communities across Canada. $215 million of that was designated for First Nations who have historically focused very much on their on-reserve population. Less than 5%, or $15 million, was specifically designated for supporting off-reserve and urban Indigenous populations, a group of hundreds of thousands of people. $15 per capita is not enough for effective support programs for the most marginalized groups in Canada. I don't need to reiterate the poverty, chronic health issues, over-policing, and discrimination faced by our Indigenous people. Our PTOs provide help where they can, but they are held back when they cannot access federal funding on an equal footing with distinction-based organizations. Nunat Tukavut needs funding for a medical transport program. Native Council of PEI housing programs are facing funding shortfalls. The Northwest Indigenous Council in British Columbia have been working to support Indigenous homelessness on the Lower East Side.
1 minute.
But without federal funding, our PTOs cannot meet the needs that already existed before COVID-19, let alone the added pressure due to a pandemic. CAP has been told we will receive $250,000 under the Indigenous Community Support Fund. This was the result of a competitive bureaucratic process that pitted off-reserve organizations against each other. This means about $25,000 per PTO or less than $3 per capita for those in need in our communities across the country. We are glad that the government acknowledged $15 million for urban Indigenous communities was insufficient. We said so when the funding levels were first announced in March.
We're at time right now, Chief Bertrand.
Okay, I'll be sending the rest of my notes to your committee.